sour old beldame with a face of curds welcomed us. Thank you, he said. Howdy-ho, she told me. I hope I see you alive when I come back in the morning, and your dinner's on the sideboard. Saying which, she departed in a late model convertible with first and second murderers. Mrs. Dudley, Theodora said, first murderer must be Dudley at the gate. I suppose the other was Count Dracula. A wholesome family. Since we are listing our cast of characters, he said, my name is Luke Sanderson. Eleanor was startled into speaking. Then you're one of the family. The people who own Hill House. Not one of Dr. Montague's guests. I am one of the family. Some day this stately pile will belong to me. Until then, however, I am here as one of Dr. Montague's guests. Theodora giggled. We, she said, are Eleanor and Theodora, two little girls who were planning a picnic down by the brook and got scared home by a rabbit. I go in mortal terror of rabbits, Luke agreed politely. May I come if I carry the picnic basket? You may bring your ukulele and strum to us while we eat chicken sandwiches. Is Dr. Montague here? He's inside, Luke said, gloating over his haunted house. They were silent for a minute, wanting to move closer together, and then Theodora said thinly, It doesn't sound so funny now, does it? Since now it's getting dark. Ladies, welcome, and the great front door opened. Come inside. I am Dr. Montague. The four of them stood, for the first time, in the wide, dark entrance of the Hill House. Around them in the house steadied and located them. Above them hills slept watchfully. Small eddies of air and sound and movement stirred, and waited and whispered, and the centre of consciousness was somehow the small space where they stood, four separated people, and looked trustingly at one another. I am very happy that everyone arrived safely, and on time, Dr. Montague said. Welcome, all of you, welcome to Hill House. Although perhaps that sentiment ought to come more promptly from you, my boy. In any case, welcome, welcome. Luke, my boy, can you make a martini? Dr. Montague raised his glass and sipped hopefully, and sighed. Fair, he said. Only fair, my boy, to our success at Hill House, however. How would one reckon success exactly in an affair like this? Luke inquired curiously. The doctor laughed. Put it then, he said, that I hope that all of us will have an exciting visit, and my book will rock my colleagues back on their heels. I cannot call your visit a vacation, although to some it might seem so, because I am hopeful of your working, although work, of course, depends largely upon what is to be done, does it not? Notes, he said with relief, as though fixing upon one unshakable solidity in a world of fog. Notes, we will take notes to some, a not unbearable task. So long as no one makes any puns about spirits and spirits, Theodora said, holding out her glass to Luke to be filled. Spirits, the doctor bid her. Spirits. Yes, indeed. Of course, none of us. He hesitated, frowning. Certainly not, he said, and took 3 quick, agitated sips at his cocktail. Everything's so strange, Eleanor said. I mean, this morning I was wondering what Hill House would be like, and now I can't believe was silent for a moment, the quiet weight of the house pressed down from all around them. Eleanor, wondering if she were really here at all, and not dreaming of Hill House, from safe spots impossibly remote, looked slowly and carefully around the room, telling herself that this was real. These things existed, from the tiles around the fireplace to the marble cupid. These people were going to be her friends. The doctor was round and rosy and bearded, and looked as though he might be more suitably established before a fire in a pleasant little sitting room, with a cat on his knee, and a rosy little wife to bring him jellied scones. And yet, he was undeniably the Dr. Montague who had guided Eleanor here, a little man both knowledgeable and stubborn. Across the fire from the doctor was Theodora, who had gone unerringly to the most nearly comfortable chair, had wriggled herself into it somehow, with her legs over the arm and her head tucked in against the back. She was like a cat, Eleanor thought, and clearly a cat waiting for his dinner. Luke was not still for a minute, but moved back and forth across the shadows, fitting glasses, stirring the fire, touching the marble cupid. He was bright in the firelight and restless. They were all silent, looking into the fire, lazy after their several journeys, and Eleanor thought, I am the fourth person in this room. I am one of them. I belong. Since we are all here, Luke said suddenly, as though there had been no pause in the conversation, shouldn't we get acquainted? We know only names so far. I know that it is Eleanor here who is wearing a red sweater, and consequently it must be Theodora who wears yellow. Dr. Montague has a beard, Theodora said, so you must be Luke. And you are Theodora, Eleanor said, because I am Eleanor. And Eleanor, she told herself triumphantly, who belongs, who is talking easily, who is sitting by the fire with her friends. Therefore you are wearing the red sweater, Theodora explained to her soberly. I have no beard, Luke said, so he must be Dr. Montague. I have a beard, Dr. Montague said, pleased, and looked around them with a happy beam. My wife, he said, likes a man to wear a beard. Many women, on the other hand, find a beard distasteful. A clean-shaven man, you'll excuse me, my boy, never looks fully dressed, my wife tells me. He held out his glass to Luke. Now that I know which of us is me, Luke said, let me identify myself further. I am, in private life, assuming that this is public life, and the rest of the world is actually private. Let me see, a bullfighter. Yes, a bullfighter. I love my life with a B, Eleanor said, in spite of herself, because he is bearded. Very true, Luke nodded at her. That makes me Dr. Montague. I live in Bangkok, and my hobby is bothering women. Not at all, Dr. Montague protested, amused. I live in Belmont. Theodora laughed and gave Luke that quick, understanding glance she had earlier given Eleanor. Eleanor, watching, thought wryly that it might be sometimes oppressive to be for too long around one so immediately in tune, so perceptive as Theodora. I am by profession an artist model, Eleanor said quickly, to silence her own thoughts. I live a mad, abandoned life, draped in a shawl and going from garret to garret. Are you heartless and wanton, Luke asked, or are you one of the fragile creatures who will fall in love with the Lord's Son and pine away? Losing all your beauty and coughing a good deal, Theodora added. I rather think I have a heart of gold, Eleanor said reflectively. At any rate, my affairs are the talk of the cafes. Dear me, she thought, dear me. Alas, Theodora said, I am a lord's daughter. Ordinarily, I go clad in silk and lace and cloth of gold, but I have borrowed my smiled in the firelight. A pilgrim, a wanderer. Truly a congenial little group, Luke said approvingly. Destined to be inseparable friends, in fact. A courtesan, a pilgrim, a princess, and a bullfighter. Hill House has surely never seen our like. I will give the honour to Hill House, Theodora said. I have never seen its like. She rose, carrying her glass, and went to examine a bowl of glass flowers. What did they call this room, do you suppose? A parlour, perhaps, Dr. Montague said. Perhaps a boudoir. I thought we would be more comfortable in here than in one of the other rooms. As a matter of tact, I think we ought to regard this room as our centre of operations, a kind of common room. It may not be cheerful. Of course it is cheerful, Theodora said staunchly. There is nothing more exhilarating than a maroon upholstery and oak panelling. And what is that in a corner there? A sedan chair. Tomorrow you will see the other rooms, the doctor told her. If we were going to have this for a rumpus room, Luke said, I propose we move in something to sit on. I cannot perch for long on anything here. I skid, he said confidentially to Leila. Tomorrow, the doctor said. Tomorrow, as a matter of fact, we will explore the entire house and arrange things to please ourselves. And now, if you have all finished, I suggest that we determine what Mrs. Dudley has done about our dinner. Theodora moved at once and then stopped, bewildered. Someone is going to have to lead me, she said. I can't possibly tell where the dining room is. She pointed. That door leads to the long passage, and then into the front hall, she said. The doctor chuckled. Wrong, my dear. That door leads to the conservatory. He rose to lead the way. I have studied the map of the house, he said complacently, and I believe that we have only to go through the door here, down the passage, into the front hall, and across the room, and through the billiard room to find the dining room. Not hard, he said, once you get into practice. Why did they mix themselves up so? Theodora asked. Why so many little odd rooms? Maybe they like to hide from each other, Luke said. I can't understand why they wanted everything so dark, Theodora said. She and Eleanor were following Dr. Montague down the passage, and Luke came behind, lingering to look into the drawer of a narrow table, and wondering aloud to himself at the Perhaps I really did her an injustice. She said she hoped to find me alive in the morning, and our dinner was in the oven. Now I suspect she intended me to die of gluttony. What keeps her here? Eleanor asked Dr. Montague. Why does she and her husband stay on, alone in this house? As I understand it, the Dudleys have taken care of Hill House ever since anyone can remember. Certainly the Sandersons were happy enough to keep them on. But tomorrow, Theodora giggled. Mrs. Dudley is probably the only true surviving member of the family, to whom Hill House really belongs. I think she is only waiting until all the Sanderson hears. That's you, Luke. Die off in various horrible ways, and then she gets the house and the fortune in jewels buried in the cellar. Or maybe she and Dudley hoard their gold in the secret chamber, or there's oil under the house. There's no secret chambers in Hill House, the doctor said with finality. Naturally, that possibility has been suggested before, and I think I may say with assurance that no such romantic devices exist here. But tomorrow, in any case, oil is definitely old hat. Nothing at all to discover on the property these days, Luke told Theodora. The very least Mrs. Dudley could murder me for in cold blood is uranium. Or just the pure fun of it, Theodora said. Yes, Eleanor said, but why are we here? For a long minute, the three of them looked at her. Theodora and Luke curiously, the doctor gravely. Then Theodora just said, just what I was going to ask. Why are we here? What is wrong with Hill House? What is going to happen? Tomorrow. No, Theodora said, almost petulantly. We are three adult, intelligent people. We have all come a long way, Dr. Montague, to meet you here in Hill House. Eleanor wants to know why, and so do I. Me too, Luke said. Why did you bring us here, Doctor? Why are you here yourself? How did you hear about Hill House? And why does it have such a reputation? And what really goes on here? What is going to happen? The doctor frowned unhappily. I don't know, he said. And then, when Theodora made a quick, irritated gesture, he went on. I know very little more about the house than you do, and naturally, I intended to tell you everything I do know. As for what is going to happen, I will learn that when you do. But tomorrow is soon enough to talk about it, I think. Daylight. Not for me, Theodora said. I assure you, the doctor said, that Hill House will be quiet tonight. There is a pattern to these things, as though psychic phenomena were subject to laws of a very particular sort. I really think we ought to talk about it tonight, Luke said. We're not afraid, Eleanor added. The doctor sighed again. Suppose, he said slowly, you heard the story of Hill House and decided not to stay. How would you leave tonight? He looked around at them again, quickly. The gates are locked. Hill House has a reputation for insistent hospitality. It seemingly dislikes letting its guests get away. The last person who tried to leave Hill House in darkness, it was 18 years ago, I grant you, was killed at the turning in the driveway, where his horse bolted and crushed him against the big tree. Suppose I tell you about Hill House, and one of you wants to leave. Tomorrow, at least, we could see you got safely to the village. But we're not going to run away, Theodora said. I'm not, and Eleanor isn't, and Luke isn't. Stoutly, upon the ramparts, Luke agreed. You are a mutinous group of assistants. After dinner, then, we will retire to our little boudoir for coffee, and a little of the good brandy Luke has in his suitcase. And I will tell you all I know about Hill House. Now, however, let us talk about music, or painting, or even politics. I had not decided, the doctor said, turning the brandy in his glass, how best to prepare the three of you for Hill House. I certainly could not write you about it, and I am most unwilling now to influence your minds. chance to see for yourselves. They were back in the small parlour, warm and almost sleepy. Theodora had abandoned any attempt at a chair and had put herself down on the hearth rug, cross-legged and drowsy. Eleanor, wanting to sit on the hearth rug beside her, had not thought of it in time and had condemned herself to one of the slippery chairs, unwilling now to attract any attention by moving, and getting herself awkwardly down onto the floor. Mrs. Dudley's good dinner and an hour's quiet conversation had evaporated the faint air of unreality and constraint. They had begun to know one another, recognise individual voices and mannerisms, faces and laughter. Eleanor thought with a little shock of surprise that she had been in Hill House only for 4 or 5 hours, and smiled a little at the fire. She could feel the thin stem of her glass between her fingers, the stiff pressure of the chair against her back, the faint movements of air through the room, which were barely perceptible in small stirrings of tassels and beads. Darkness lay in the corners, and the marble cupid smiled down on them with chubby good humour. "What a time for a ghost story," Theodora said. "If you please." The doctor was stiff. "We are not children trying to frighten one another," he said. "Sorry," Theodora smiled up at him. "I'm just trying to get myself used to all of this." "Let us," said the doctor, "exercise great caution in our language. Preconceived notions of ghosts and apparitions." "The disembodied hand in the soup," Luke said helpfully. "My dear boy, if you please, I was trying to explain that our purpose here, since it is of scientific and exploratory nature, ought not to be affected, perhaps even warped, by half-remembered spooky stories which belong more properly to, let me see, marshmallow roast." Pleased with himself, he looked around to be sure that they were all amused. As a matter of fact, my researches over the past few years had led me to certain theories regarding psychic phenomena, which I have now, for the first time, an opportunity of testing. Ideally, of course, you ought not to know anything about Hill House. You should be ignorant and receptive. "And take notes," Theodora murmured. "Notes, yes, indeed, notes. However, I realise that it is most impractical to leave you entirely without background information, largely because you are not people accustomed to meeting a situation without preparation." He beamed at them slyly. "You are 3 wilful, spoiled children who are prepared to nag me for your bedtime story." Theodora giggled, and the doctor nodded at her happily. He rose and moved to stand by the fire in an unmistakable classroom pose. He seemed to feel the lack of a blackboard behind him, because once or twice he half-turned, hand raised, as though looking for chalk to illustrate a point. "Now," he said, "we will take up a history of Hill House." "I wish I had a notebook and pen," Eleanor thought, "just to make him feel at home." She glanced at Theodora and Luke, and found both their faces fallen instinctively into a completely rapt classroom look. "High earnestness," she thought. "We have moved into another stage of our adventure." "You will recall," the doctor began, "the house is described in Leviticus as leprous, or Homer's phrase for the underworld. Aeodomus, the house of Hades. I need not remind you, I think, that the concept of certain houses as unclean or forbidden, perhaps sacred, is as old as the mind of man. Certainly there are spots which inevitably attach to themselves an atmosphere of holiness and goodness. It might not then be too fanciful to say that some houses are born bad. Hill House, whatever the cause, has been unfit for human habitation for upwards of 20 years. What it was like before then, whether its personality was moulded by the people who lived here, or the things they did, or whether it was evil from its start, are all questions I cannot answer. Naturally, I hope that we will all know a good deal more knows even why some houses are called haunted. What else could you call Hill House? Luke demanded. Well, disturbed perhaps, leprous, sick, any of the popular euphemisms for insanity. A deranged house is pretty conceit. There are popular theories, however, which discount the eerie, the mysterious. There are people who will tell you that the disturbances I'm calling psychic are actually the result of subterranean waters, or electric currents, or hallucinations caused by polluted air, atmospheric pressure, sunspots, earth tremors all have their advocates among the skeptical. People, the doctor said sadly, are always so anxious to get things out into the open, where they can put a name on them. Even a meaningless name, so long as it has something of a scientific ring. He sighed, relaxing, and gave them a little quizzical smile. A haunted house, he said. Everyone laughs. I found myself telling my colleagues at the university that I was going camping this summer. I told people I was participating in a scientific experiment, Theodora said helpfully, without telling them where or what, of course. Presumably, your friends feel less strongly about scientific experience than mine. Yes, the doctor sighed again. Camping, at my age, and yet that they believed. Well, he straightened up again and fumbled at his side. Perhaps for a yardstick. I first heard about Hill House a year ago, from a former tenant. He began by assuring me that he had left Hill House because his family objected to living so far out in the country, and ended by saying that, in his opinion, the house ought to be burnt down to the ground, sowed with salt. I learned of other people who had rented Hill House, and found that none of them had stayed more than a few days, certainly never the full terms of their leases, giving reasons that range from the dampness of the location. Not at all true, by the way. The house is very dry, to a pressing need to move elsewhere for business readings. That is, every tenant who has left Hill House hastily has made an effort to supply a rational reason for leaving, and yet every one of them has left. I tried, of course, to learn more from these former tenants, and yet in no case could I persuade them to discuss the house. They all seemed most unwilling to give me information, and were, in fact, reluctant to recall the details of their civil stays. In only one opinion were they united. Without exception, every person who has spent any length of time in this house urged me to stay as far away from it as possible. Not one of the former tenants could bring himself to admit that Hill House was haunted, but when I visited Hillsdale and looked up the newspaper records. Newspapers, Theodora asked. Was there a scandal? Oh yes, the doctor said. A perfectly splendid scandal, with a suicide and madness and lawsuits. Then I learned that the local people had no doubts about the house. I heard a dozen different stories, of course. It is really unbelievably difficult to get accurate information about a haunted house. It would astonish you to know that what I have gone through to learn only as much as I have. And as a result, I went to Mrs. Sanderson, Luke's aunt, and arranged to rent Hill House. She was most frank about its undesirability. It's harder to burn down a house than you think, Luke said, but agreed to allow me to a short lease to carry out my researches, on condition that a member of the family be one of my party. They hope, Luke said solemnly, that I would dissuade you from digging up the lovely old scandals. There, now I have explained how I happened to be here, and why Luke has come. As for you ladies, we all know by now that you were here because I wrote you, and you accepted my invitation. I hoped that each of you might, in her own way, intensify the forces at work in the house. Theodora has shown herself possessed of some telepathic ability, and Eleanor has in the past been intimately involved in poltergeist phenomena. I, Of course, the doctor looked at her curiously. Many years ago, when you were a child. The stones. Eleanor frowned and shook her head. Her fingers trembled around the stem of her glass. And then she said, "That was my neighbours. My mother said the neighbours did that. People are always jealous." Perhaps so, the doctor spoke quietly and smiled at Eleanor. "The incident has been forgotten long ago. Of course, I only mentioned it because that is why I wanted you in your house." "When I was a child," Theodora said lazily, "many years ago, Doctor, as she put it so tactfully, I was whipped for throwing a brick through a greenhouse roof. I remember I thought about it for a long time, remembering the whipping, but remembering also the lovely crash, and after thinking about it very seriously, I went out and did it again." "I don't remember very well," Eleanor said uncertainly to the doctor. "But why?" Theodora asked. "I mean, I can accept that Hill House is supposed to be haunted, and you want us here, Dr. Montague, to help keep track of what happened. And I bet besides that you wouldn't at all like being here alone. But I just don't understand. It's a horrible old house, and if I rented it, I'd scream for my money back after one fast look at the front hall. But what's here? What really frightens people so?" "I would not put a name to what has no name," the doctor said. "I don't know. They never even told me what was going on," Eleanor said urgently to the doctor. "My mother said it was the neighbours. They were always against us because she wouldn't mix with them. My mother," Luke interrupted her slowly and deliberately. "I think," he said, "that we all want is facts, something we can understand and put together." "First," the doctor said, "I'm going to ask you all a question. Do you want to leave? Do you advise that we pack up now and leave Hill House to itself and never have anything more to do with it?" He looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor put her hands together tight. "It is another chance to get away," she was thinking, and she said, "No," and glanced with embarrassment at Theodora. "I was kind of a baby this afternoon," she explained. "I did let myself get frightened." "She's not telling all the truth," Theodora said loyally. "She wasn't any more frightened than I was. We scared each other half to death over a rabbit." "Horrible creatures, rabbits," Luke said. The doctor laughed. "I suppose we were all nervous this afternoon. Anyway, it is a rude shock to turn that corner and get a clear look at Hill House." "I thought he was going to send the car into a tree," Luke said. "I am really very brave now, in a warm room, with a fire and company," Theodora said. "I don't think we could leave now if we wanted to." Eleanor had spoken before she realised clearly what she was going to say, or what it was going to sound like to the others. She saw that they were staring at her, and laughed and added lamely, "Mrs. Dudley would never forgive us." She wondered if they really believed that that was what she had meant to say, and thought, perhaps it has us now, this house, perhaps it will not let us go. "Let us have a little more brandy," the doctor said, "and I will tell you the story of Hill House." He returned to his classroom position before the fireplace and began slowly, as one giving an account of kings long dead and wars long done with. His voice was carefully unemotional. "Hill House was built 80-odd years ago," he began. "It was built as a home for his family by a man named Hugh Crane, a country home where he hoped to see his children and grandchildren live in a comfortable luxury, and where he fully expected to end his days in a quiet. Unfortunately, Hill House was a sad house almost from the beginning. Hugh Crane's young wife died minutes before she was first to set eyes on the house, when the carriage bringing her here overturned in the driveway, and the lady was brought lifeless, I believe it is the phrase they use, into the home her husband had built for her. was a sad and bitter man. Hugh Crane, left with two small daughters Children grew up here? Eleanor asked incredulously. The doctor smiled. The house is dry, as I said. There were no swamps to bring them fevers. The country air was thought to be beneficial to them, and the house itself was regarded as luxurious. I have no doubt that 2 small children could play here, lonely perhaps, but not unhappy. I hope they went wading in the brook, Theodora said. She stared deeply into the fire. Poor little things. I hope someone left them run in that meadow and pick wildflowers. Their father married again, the doctor went on, twice more, as a matter of fact. He seems to have been unlucky in his wives. The second Mrs. Crane died of a fall, although I have been able to ascertain how or why. Her death seems to have been as tragically unexpected as her predecessors. The third Mrs. Crane died of what they used to call consumption. Somewhere in Europe there is, somewhere in the library, a collection of postcards sent to the 2 little girls left behind in Hill House from their father and their stepmother, travelling from one health resort to another. The little girls were left here with their governess until their stepmother's death. After that, Hugh Crane declared his intention of closing Hill House and remaining abroad, and his daughters were sent to live with a cousin of their mother's, and there they remained until they were grown up. I hope Mamma's cousin was a little jollier than old Hugh, Theodora said, still staring darkly into the fire. It's not nice to think of children growing up like mushrooms in the dark. They felt differently, the doctor said. The 2 sisters spent the rest of their lives quarrelling over Hill House. After all his high hopes of a dynasty centred here, Hugh Crane died somewhere in Europe, shortly after his wife, and Hill House was left jointly to the 2 sisters, who must have been quite young ladies by then. The older sister had, at any rate, made her debut into society, and put up her hair and learned to drink champagne and carry a fan. Hill House was empty for another number of years, but kept always in readiness for the family, at first in expectation of Hugh Gray's return, and then, after his death, for either of the sisters who chose to live there. Somewhere during this time, it was apparently agreed between the 2 sisters that Hill House should become the property of the older, the younger sister had married. Aha, Theodora said. The younger sister married. Stole her sister's beau, I've no doubt. It was said that the older sister was crossed in love, the doctor agreed, although that is said of almost any lady who prefers, for whatever reason, to live alone. At any rate, it was the older sister who came back here to live. She seemed to have resembled her father strongly. She lived here alone for a number of years, almost in seclusion, although the village of Hillsdale knew her. Incredibly, as it may sound to you, she genuinely loved Hill House and looked upon it as her family home. She eventually took a girl from the village to live with her, as a kind of companion. So far I can learn there seems to have been no strong feeling among the villagers about the house then, since old Miss Crane, as she was inevitably known, hired her servants in the village, and it was thought a fine thing for her to take the village girl as a companion. Old Miss Crane was in constant disagreement with her sister over the house, the younger sister insisting that she had given up her claim on the house in exchange for a number of family heirlooms, some of considerable value, which her sister then refused to give her. There were some jewels, several pieces of antique furniture, and a set of gold-rimmed dishes, which seemed to irritate the younger sister more than anything else. Mrs. Sanderson let me rummage through a box of family papers, and so I have seen some of the letters Miss Crane received from her sister. And in all of them, those dishes stand out as the recurrent sore subject. At any rate, the older sister died of pneumonia here in the house, with only the little companion to help her. There were stories later of a doctor called too late, of the old lady lying neglected upstairs, while the younger woman dallied in the garden with some village lout, but I suspect that these are only scandalous inventions. I certainly cannot find that anything of the sort was widely believed at the time. And in fact, most of the stories seem to stem directly from the poisonous vengefulness of the younger sister, who never rested in her anger. I don't like the younger sister, Theodora said. First she stole her sister's lover, and then she's tried to steal her sister's dishes. No, I don't like her. Hill House has an impressive list of tragedies connected with it, but then, most old houses have. People have to live and die somewhere, after all, and a house can certainly stand for 80 years, without seeing some of its inhabitants die within its walls. After the death of the older sister, there was a lawsuit over the house. The companion insisted that the house was left to her, but the younger sister and her husband maintained most violently that the house belonged legally to them, and claimed that the companion had tricked the older sister into signing away property, which she had always intended leaving to her sister. It was an unpleasant business, like all family quarrels, and as in all family quarrels, incredibly harsh and cruel things were said on either side. The companion swore in court, and here, I think, is the first hint of Hill House in its true personality. That the younger sister came into the house at night and stole things. So, this is quite a big chapter,